Research academics are a lot like rock stars, only without the fame, money, drugs, hookers, and pimps. Well, sometimes there's a pimp involved.
With the local authorities in running his pimp game. First, however, there was the difficult challenge of gaining his trust.
Collins, can we skip to the technicals, please?
Sure. Let me just finish here. You see, a pimp's love is very different from that of a square.
Collins!
Live and die by their output. For rock stars, it's all about the songs. For researchers, it's all about the studies.
But note what happens when I instead throw this laboratory koala.
It passed through unharmed.
This is a big part of the researcher's life, always trying to come up with new research designs that will capture everyone's attention and reveal something amazing about the nature of life. And they work hard, especially when they're still in grad school and trying to prove themselves. For example, it might lead two psychology grad students to spend a week building a room-sized Faraday cage for a study on transcranial magnetic stimulation, and then 6 years later team up to do a web series on psychology and pop culture. To, just pick a random example. So why do I bring this up? Because I love a great research design. The best ones are often the most simple and profound. For example, 11-year-old Emily Rosa's straight-up brilliant study that debunked therapeutic touch with just a cardboard partition. Look it up, it's really amazing and it's actually worth a watch. And that brings us to today's subject, a bizarre but amazing study that involves staring into the abyss of existential anxiety with David Lynch and his rabbits. Who is David Lynch? Well, imagine if Salvador Dali tried to use the teleportation machine from The Fly, but instead of just a fly getting in the machine, it was a pack of cigarettes, 2 cups of damn good black coffee, a slice of cherry pie, and the Grim Reaper from The Seventh Seal. Out pops David Lynch, an inspired filmmaker with a style so unique it created an entire subgenre of film. And it created a television series that is so influential, it's hard to imagine what the landscape of television would look like today without it. He's original, inspired, and influential. In other words, he is everything M. Night Shyamalan is not. For one thing, he has a sense of humor.
We now return to How David Lynch Stole Christmas.
Hello, I got you a present. It's a thumb.
Huh?
Don't look away. Let the fear wash over you.
I don't understand.
That's the whole point. Now, did you leave a plate of black coffee out for me?
No.
In the future, please leave a plate of black coffee out for me. Also in the past.
Lynch's works are notoriously surreal, so much so that when his 2001 film Mulholland Drive was originally released on DVD, it came with a little paper booklet giving clues to the audience on how to decipher the movie. Think about that for a moment. Most of the people buying this movie on DVD saw this in the theater and liked it enough to want to own it. And they still needed help on figuring out what the hell is going on in the movie. The best part? This was the film that earned him the Oscar for Best Director. His films follow a dream logic that often reveals itself in a way which disregards normal narrative methods in favor of invoking emotional states in the audience. Except for that one time when the mayor from Portlandia rode the giant worm.
time, Mr. Mayor, for Mr. President.
Thank you.
This brings us to the rabbits. Yep, we are definitely in Lynchland. Rabbits is a 2002 series of short films that Lynch originally made only available for viewing on his website. The films depict 3 humanoid rabbits in a domestic setting, their conversations often interrupted by an intrusive laugh track. I guess this is Lynch's version of a sitcom. Oh wait, that's exactly what he thinks it is, as he described it just that way in an interview. The conversations between the rabbits is just a series of non sequiturs. Inexplicable things happen, like a burning hole in the wall, or a demonic voice speaking out of the shadows. Other times, the rabbits just recite poetry to one another.
An old warm rug. A dog crawls. Oh. Something's wrong. Oh. The dog crawls. Lights blow out. A wind. Dark.
Well, it's still funnier than Last Man Standing.
Welcome to the family reunited again. Yay, dinner.
She had a whole 30 minutes to come up with that.
So what do Lynch's rabbits have to do with psychology? Well, in 2012, a team of researchers from the University of British Columbia used it to study how humans deal with an existential crisis. What is an existential crisis?
Ever since I started working, every single day of my life has been worse than the day before it. So that means that every single day that you see me, that's on the worst day of my life.
What about today? Is today the worst day of your life?
Yeah.
Wow, that's messed up.
The term gets thrown around a lot in popular discourse, but in the psychology arena, we define it as any psychological or moral crisis that causes an individual to ask fundamental questions about human existence. For more on the inevitability of human existence, see David Mitchell.
8 years of this. Get to the point! Get to the point. It's not an exhortation you can fairly make during a parlour game. There is no point. This is a pointless exercise. We are whiling away our finite time before the grave.
Or Ingmar Bergman's The Seventh Seal. And always remember, when the Grim Reaper comes for you, do not play chess with him. Play Battleship instead.
J7.
Hit. I hit. You have sunk my battleship.
Excellent!
So how do you study something like existential anxiety? Ask any psychology undergraduate student how to design a research study, and if we've done our job right, they will tell you it starts with an operational definition. For example, if you want to study insomnia, then you start by defining it as a lack of sleep. In this case, we can go with a lack of rest periods during which an individual fails to go through REM sleep cycles. It's not a perfect definition, but it is a workable one, and it can provide the foundation for a study because it gives you something to observe. After all,
remember, kids, the only difference between screwing around and science is writing it down.
This brings us back to the original question. How do you study existential anxiety? Well, just like we did with insomnia. Sleeping is the normal state, while insomnia is the abnormal state. If you don't sleep, you have insomnia. And like insomnia, existential anxiety is the abnormal state. So, we would look at the difference between someone who has anxiety as opposed to someone who does not. Then the question becomes, what is causing this difference? In theory, it's all coming from a certain realization about our existence.
People die all the time, just like that. Why, you could wake up dead tomorrow. Well, good night.
We get anxious because we realize that death is a threat which we cannot fully resolve. When you see a poisonous snake in the bushes, that's a threat you can understand and then respond to by not messing with it.
There's a bad snake!
But death?
Death is coming. Death is here. Death is outside. There's no escape. Who's that knocking at the door? Yes. It's death.
Let's take a minute and look at existential anxiety through the lens of philosophy and then through pop culture. Dealing with questions of existence can feel rather heady, and reading it often carries the side effect of making pretentious grad students. Trust us, we can attest to this. But it doesn't have to be mysterious or ungrounded. As a matter of fact, most of the famous existential thinkers, such as Heidegger, Kierkegaard, and Levinas, intended their thinking to be very grounded in everyday life, filled with events that happen to us all the time. However, they often pointed to those punctuating moments when it seems that existence stops making sense, and this is when we experience anxiety about existence. This most often surrounds death, ours or somebody else's. Let's see if I can't show this in another way. Let's take Hamlet, for example. Very likely the OG example of existential anxiety in literature.
To sleep. To sleep, perchance to dream. Aye, there's the rub. For in that sleep of death, what dreams may come, when we have shuffled off this mortal coil, must give us pause. There's the respect that makes calamity of so long life.
What Hamlet is debating here is his own suicide. But what scares him most is the great unknowable. What happens after we die? To sleep perchance to dream, he says. Aye, but what dreams may come? Hamlet is worried about what happens if there is something after death. Maybe something like a sleep you can't wake up from, a dream that one cannot shake off. Levinas, who explored Hamlet and his existential anxiety deeply, often used another comparison. Levinas compared this kind of anxiety to an insomniac, something all of us have experienced from time to time. But imagine, says Levinas, you are in an unyielding darkness, and most importantly, it is an unending night that you cannot fall asleep in, and the dawn never seems to come. Another flavor of this comes when the rules that we thought that govern the universe don't work the way we always believe them to. There is no logic to what seems to be going on, and yet you find yourself having to act anyway. Facing the unknowable feels like that drop in your stomach on a roller coaster. One of my favorite examples of this comes to us from one of the greats. No, not Socrates, Indiana Jones. What you feel, vicariously through Indy, is existential anxiety. In order to save his father, he must confront his own unbelief and his own mortality, and what seems very likely the real possibility of his own death. This scene is great, because it also gives us a chance to look at the last of the kinds of existential anxiety that I want to talk about today, the uncanny. The bridge Indy is walking on is made of stone. However, it is disguised to look like the opposing cliff face, and thus Indy can't see it. It seems to defy the senses. When our senses are dueling like this, with what we see, what we perceive versus what we know to be, when the ordinary seems to have gained unordinary qualities that now seem to threaten our existence, this can really throw us for a loop. The simplest version of this is when we are walking along a path and mistaking a branch or a piece of rope that we see out of the corner of our eye for a snake, only to quickly realize that it is a rope. We know that it is not a snake, and yet we feel very upset. We feel doubly betrayed by our body. Once in perception for our eyes thinking that it's seen a venomous reptile, and now our sympathetic nervous system that makes us feel fight or flight seems to still be active as if we are still in danger, while we know cognitively that we never have been. Of course, horror movies make use of this too, and often use it to betray us not twice, but thrice. Take, for example, this scene from Stephen K's 2005 The Boogeyman. Our protagonist here sees clothes on his chair, and he mistakes them for a person. He quickly turns on the light. Once the boy knows that he, and perhaps us, have felt the uncanny, he settles down. But then we as the audience then get to experience the uncanny again, as the clothes are now no longer the clothes, but a real yet unbelievable threat. The first analysis of this kind of existential anxiety comes to us from the father of psychoanalysis, Sigmund Freud. Freud helps us to understand this aspect of the uncanny, which a full explanation of which will have to wait for another day. But to put it simply, it's when something that we thought we knew for a fact was not real, in this case the boogeyman, is now in our face, confronting us. This paradox results in a very distinct anxiety, and all those old fears that we thought we put behind us in childhood come roaring back out to life. Now that we have a grounded understanding of existential anxiety, perhaps we need to examine how it is studied in psychology and how it might differ from these types that we have found in philosophy.
For the Lynch study, the researchers examined existential anxiety by way of something called the meaning maintenance model. The meaning maintenance model proposes that human beings innately and automatically assemble mental representations of expected relations. In other words, our minds are wired to constantly work to find meaning in the world around us in order to understand how we function. When our sense of meaning is threatened, we try to find alternatives to reestablish that certainty.
Back, I'm dying to talk about the mail with you all day, okay? Pepe Sylvia, this name keeps coming up over and over again. Every day, Pepe's mail's getting sent back to me. Pepe Sylvia, Pepe Sylvia. I look in the mail, well, this whole box is Pepe Sylvia. So I say to myself, I gotta find this guy. I gotta go up to his office. I gotta put his mail in the guy's goddamn hands. Otherwise, he's never gonna get it. It's gonna keep coming back down here. So I go up to Pepe's office, and what do I find out, man? What do I find out? There is no Pepe Sylvia.
Now that is a two-sentence summary of something that really can't be summarized completely in two sentences, but you get the idea. The meaning maintenance model is something we'll be exploring in more detail in a later video, but for now what's important is that people need to understand what's going on in what they're seeing. And that is why the British Columbia study used Lynch's rabbits to take it all away. The lack of meaning and disturbing content in rabbits was used to make people feel angst and unease. And then comes the best part of the study.
You'll probably think I'm old-fashioned, but I don't believe in taking a lot of medications. I'm very careful about the medicines I keep at home. That's why we use Tylenol.
They used Tylenol to see if it would combat this newly invoked existential anxiety. Now, there was a legit reason for this, and not just because Tylenol was paying for the study. I'm just joking, Tylenol was not paying for the study. Tylenol contains acetaminophen, which has been shown to inhibit physical and even social pain. So in the study, the researchers were trying to investigate where existential anxiety was occurring in the body. And this brings us to one of the more interesting things found in the study. You see, the participants were then asked to engage in some decision-making regarding crime and punishment. They were asked to pass judgment on the rioters who went wild after the Vancouver Canucks lost the Stanley Cup in 2011. Hockey, for those of us in the States, is a Canadian religion which involves sacrificing teeth to the gods of winter, or something like that. The volunteers in the placebo group who got a sugar pill instead of a Tylenol doled out harsher punishments. Those who had been given the Tylenol were significantly more lenient. And this was not an isolated finding. They had similar reactions in past experiments. You see, when people have lost meaning, they become uneasy and anxious, and then they tend to affirm things they believe in more strongly. In other words, people double down where they can find meaning. It's called compensatory affirmation. When faced with a pain, threat, or discomfort we can't resolve, we compensate by more strongly affirming the strength of our values. For example, following the horrific Boston Marathon bombing in 2013, The anxiety in the face of not understanding why the attacks happened turned into a blizzard of stories on social media about bystanders who saved people's lives, or runners who crossed the finish line and kept on running to the hospital to give blood. But before we start thinking compensatory affirmation is a positive thing, keep in mind what happened in the Lynch study. Compensatory affirmation resulted in people being less forgiving and more punishing in their decision-making. It's something to keep in mind, no pun intended, when we make decisions. Now, to be clear, this study was far more complex than I've described in this very brief summary. I strongly recommend checking out the original publication, or one of the several mainstream articles that went into more details than I did.
Times.
Oh, boy.
This is Aristotle, thought to be the smartest man on the planet. He believed that the Earth was the center of the universe, and everybody believed him because he was so smart. Until another smartest guy came around, Galileo, and he disproved that theory, making Aristotle and everybody else on Earth look like a bitch.